Thank you so much. As we continue this series close to home, we hope you know that wherever you are or aren't on your spiritual journey, there is a place for you here. We want you to consider this your home away from home. As you may have picked up, we are talking about Mary and Elizabeth today. And as Luke starts in chapter 1 talking about Mary's visit from the angel Gabriel, it says that it is in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy. And after Mary hears the fated news, she hurries, it says, with haste to Elizabeth's home. And we pick up the story there in verse 37 of chapter 1. Verse 39 of chapter 1. At that time, Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zechariah's home and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby, this is John the Baptist, leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. In a loud voice, she exclaimed, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored?" As Yvette and I often say to each other, how did we get to be so lucky that the mother of my Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord would fulfill his promises to her. Mary stayed with Elizabeth for about 3 months and then returned home. Despite some of the negative news coverage that we have seen from the area due to our decades of war throughout the Middle East, Middle Easterners are known around the world to be some of the most welcoming and radically hospitable people on the face of this planet. And it shouldn't be all that surprising because it kind of comes out of necessity. The unforgiving climate of the Middle East, rocky, deserty, hard place to live, especially back then, made it necessary for you to welcome whatever stranger came across your path. There is a possibility that if you didn't open your heart and open your home to the people that you met, they could very literally die. Which is part of the reason why the Bible is so packed full of stories and exhortations that when you entertain strangers, you may be entertaining angels unaware. These commands for us not to ignore the orphan or the widow in our midst, the immigrant or the foreigner, the stranger who is hungry or bloody on the side of the road. The first time I went backpacking around the world, I started off a little slow with a friend of mine in England, pretty easy place to start. But then I climbed immediately onto a plane and I flew into Cairo a little bit after midnight one night. I could tell the moment that I stepped off the plane that this is going to be unlike anything I have ever experienced before in my life. I didn't know a soul. And so I met 4 other young Australian backpackers who were standing in the customs line. We were the only Westerners around. And we decided that we would go and find a hostel together and stick together. So we were standing at the baggage carousel waiting for our luggage when this very large man, just a couple years older than us in a uniform, seemed to be staring at us from the other side of the baggage carousel. Before long, he came around and he marched right up to us and he very brazenly started asking us all these questions. Who are you? Where have you come from? Why are you here? Who are you visiting? Where are you going to stay? And we tried to explain to him that we were backpackers, these basically global nomads, that we didn't know anyone there in Egypt, and we were just coming to visit his country. We realized that his uniform, he was a pilot for Egyptian Airways, and he told us that his name was Ahmed. And he said, it's very late. My apartment is too small for all 5 of you. My parents aren't going to be very happy, but I will call my parents. I'm sure there'll be room in their house for you, or at least over at my aunt's. And we tried to reassure him that this whole thing, that hostels stay open all night, and that we were going to find a place and we were going to be okay. We opened our Lonely Planet books and we showed him the place that we wanted to go. But he had this incredulous, very distressed look on his face. And he said to us, well, I'm waiting for you. And so he stood there and waited for all of our luggage to come. And then he escorted us on the public transportation over to the hostel. And he walked up to the clerk ahead of us, and he started speaking to him in Arabic, and he negotiated a less expensive price for us, and told the man at the desk that we were his very special guests. He gave us his number and told us to call him first thing in the morning. And for the rest of the week, every moment that he wasn't off flying with Egyptian Airways, he was taking us around his city, showing us all the things we wanted to see, showing us things we would have never known about otherwise, being our best friend, our tour guide, our cousin in Egypt. And on the very last night, he invited us over to his home for a special send-off dinner that he himself, as a bachelor living in this itsy-bitsy apartment, had cooked for us. It was an evening filled with warmth and laughter. And at the end of the night, he made this little speech about how honored he was to have us in his city, how good it was to have made our acquaintance. He asked us if he could pray over us for safe travels as we left. And then he gave each one of us a present. He gave us a present. It was these 5 little papyrus scrolls. They were actually incredibly gaudy. They had these bright neon pink and green hieroglyphics written on them. But in that moment, as far as we were concerned, they couldn't have been any more special if they were the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves. The Christmas story actually starts somewhere around the 3rd chapter of Genesis, when Adam and Eve are banished from paradise, from this garden that was created as their home. It says that God put an angel with a flaming sword at the gate of Eden so that they would be forced, like their son Cain, to spend their lives wandering this earth, as John Steinbeck puts it, somewhere east of Eden. And of course, the whole rest of the story of the Bible is the story of men and women wandering around the earth, trying to reclaim paradise, trying to reclaim that perfect home, creating it when and where they can. The people for years and years thought the promised land was going to be that place. And so they went after it. They spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness, and they finally crossed across the river into it. And it wasn't quite the paradise that they had been expecting. It was pretty good. But even then, after some years, they lost it. Just as all of us, no matter how wonderful of homes we're able to create on this side of paradise, we all lose them. They never last as long as we want them to, do they? Because we are born to be wanderers on this earth. We are born to never experience that final paradise kind of home that we're longing for this side of eternity. But that doesn't mean that creating a foretaste of that kind of home isn't the most beautiful and important thing that anyone can do for themselves, for their families, for their friends, for the strangers who come across their paths in this lifetime. Now, of course, Elizabeth was not Ahmed. She was not some stranger Egyptian Airways pilot. She was Mary's cousin. But it doesn't make what she did in that moment any less powerful. At a time when Mary needed it most, at a time when Mary's entire life had devolved into scandal, when she probably wasn't being accepted by her family or her friends, when she was losing her fiance, could have lost her life if he had gone to the authorities. At the time she needed it most, Elizabeth opened her heart and opened her home wide to Mary. And it wasn't like Elizabeth didn't have a lot on her own plate either, right? What did it say a few verses before? She was in the 6th month of pregnancy. And at an advanced age when being pregnant was neither safe nor easy, at a time when her husband should have been taking care of her, she's taking care of her God-induced disabled husband who can't speak. And yet she opens her arms and she opens her home to Mary enthusiastically. She says, "How did I get to be so lucky? How did I get to be so favored to have you come to me? The baby in my stomach has leapt for joy just hearing your voice." How often do you get that kind of reception when you need to go to somebody to ask for a big favor? Elizabeth had a lot going on. And they sneak it in there, right there at the 57th verse. It says, oh yeah, and by the way, Mary stayed with this 6th-month pregnant woman for about 3 months. Are you kidding me? 3 months? My mom, when she comes out from Charlotte, she won't come for more than 4 or 5 days. She says she thinks she's going to become too much of an imposition if she stays longer than that. We're left thinking that maybe we're not such great hosts after that much time. Mary stays with Elizabeth right up until her birth at month 9. But don't you think that maybe the reason that Mary ran to Elizabeth's home with haste is because she knew something about Elizabeth? She knew that Elizabeth was one of those people who lived her life as if the people around her were always welcome in her home and in her heart and in her life. If we're lucky, we all probably know someone who we could go to at any time of the day or night, with anything going on in our lives, and we will be received with joy. Many of you have met my dear friend Bill Stubbs. He's been here a number of times. He's spoken in the church. He did a children's sermon for us one time during stewardship season. Bless his soul. I'm going to be flying down to Mexico to marry Bill to his partner Kurt this April. Well, when we were doing singles ministry back at Memorial Drive Pres in Houston, Bill had this mantra that he was always saying. He said, you know, folks, we can go through this life. It is a choice whether we go through this life acting like a guest or a host. And he would tell us that everybody tends to go through life one of those two ways. Those who go through life as a guest tend to act like a guest no matter where they are. If they are with a group of people out, if they're the one who's the most comfortable in a group, even if they're throwing a party at their own house, they will act like they are a guest in their own house. And he said, conversely, those who go through life as a host tend to act like a host wherever they go. Whether they're in a foreign country or with a group of people that they don't know, or even an invited guest to somebody else's party. What I know is that anywhere Bill goes, he is the host. We go out to a restaurant and immediately he makes the waiter or waitress feel like they are a guest in his home. When he's here at the church, he's out at the door greeting people. When he's having a party, when he's invited to a party, he is the one who's most apt to welcome you at the door and to take your coat and to ask you if you'd like a drink. If you're a friend of Bill's and you're throwing a party, then you can count on him showing up 20 or 30 minutes early just to help you finish up whatever last details you need to get ready. And then it'll be like you have another host as he welcomes people and greets people and makes them feel at home. And of course, being the small world that this is, Bill says, this is not something I always did. This is something we can learn. This is a choice that we can make each and every day, whether we're going to go through life as a guest or a host. And if you ask him where he learned this from, he'll say it was from his dear friend and former pastor, a man named Tom Toole. It really is an intriguing question, isn't it? Which one are you? Which one am I? Do we tend to go through life as a perpetual guest or as a perpetual host? And so Mary felt like she knew that she could run with haste to Elizabeth's house and she would be warmly welcomed. You know, it's interesting. I think that we all find that God's timing is always a surprise. It's not what we expect it to be, is it? Some of you may be like Elizabeth today as we are in the midst of this Advent season. There's something that you've been waiting for a long time, that you've been praying for, and it hasn't happened, and you're starting to think it would never happen, and that maybe God isn't even listening to you. And perhaps the biggest takeaway for you in this season is that life is completely out of your control. For others, your life might feel like Mary's. That something has been hoisted on you that you were not ready for in this Advent season, maybe even in this COVID season, something that you could have never prepared yourself for, something that's left you scared and confused and angry. Maybe it's a diagnosis, maybe it's the craziness that's going on in this world, or these pandemics and how these new strains just keep coming and coming, whatever it is. God has conceived something in you that you are not ready for. And it's leaving you reeling, also feeling like the one thing you know for sure is that you are not in control of your life. And in fact, if there's anything that binds us together, no matter what faith tradition we're from, no matter where we are on our spiritual journey, no matter what stage or place we are in life, or the things that are going on with us and around us and in our families, we come here to worship, and we are bound together as a group of wanderers in this world looking for a home and quite sure that we are not in control of our lives. And another quick aside, I think these last few years we've been noticing, not for the first time, but maybe more than ever, the role that women are playing in our world. With things going crazy around us. We're noticing in the scriptures, all of history, even the Bible, was written by men, for men, about men. But we're starting to notice again these heroes around us, people like Ruth and Esther and Miriam and Hannah. Laura was preaching about Hannah 2 weeks ago, and Priscilla and Mary. We're starting to notice again that the first person to see the risen Christ and to proclaim the news that Christ is risen was Mary. That it was often women in the book of Acts who were starting the first churches in that first century AD. And here we have again, think about this. If a Christian worship service was wherever two or more gather to proclaim and celebrate the living Christ, that means that the very first Christian worship service was celebrated by two pregnant women in Elizabeth's home. I wish we had time to go around and sit down with each one of you and hear about the traditions and the things that you do during the Advent season to create home for your families, for your friends, for the people in your orbit. One of the things that I think is most beautiful about this church is this long legacy of being a radically welcoming, warm, accepting, open place for people to come. How does the church remain relevant in these days, these topsy-turvy days, postmodern, post-Christian, Delta, Omicron, Lambda, Nu kind of days that we are living in right now? And the way that we become and stay relevant is to open our hearts, to open our church, to become that home that wanderers are looking for. There are people who come through these doors every week. There are people who are watching online right now who feel like Mary did that day. Something is going on in their lives. Maybe this is the first time they've come back to church after losing a job or losing a loved one, after having a divorce or a breakup, after moving here to Los Angeles from somewhere else, leaving behind their family and all their friends and everything they knew. And they come to this place as wanderers not in control of their life, hoping to find some sort of recreation of the home that we are all longing for. And the thing that will make all the difference as to whether they find freedom and salvation, grace and love and hope, is whether they run into one of us who has decided that we are going to be an Elizabeth in people's lives, who decide that we are going to live our lives like Ahmed lives his life, who are going to decide that we are going to go through life as a perpetual host rather than a perpetual guest, that we are going to repay God's radical, generous welcome in our lives by showing it to the people around us. And so my hope and my prayer for all of us in this Advent season is that you will not just have a very Merry Christmas, but that you will have and live a very Mary and Elizabeth kind of Christmas. Amen.